Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kvetching with Adam and Jarrod. This is episode number 3, and we haven't been canceled yet. I'm sure some people have tried, but they are not going to oppress us. We are not going to be intimidated, even on Halloween, as Larry David put it. So let's begin. Just to introduce myself, if you're watching us for the first time, my name is Jarrod Tanney. I teach Jewish history at UNC Wilmington in North Carolina.
And I'm Adam Fuller. I teach political science at Youngstown State University, also the director of our Center for Judaic and Holocaust Studies.
And we are going to let our esteemed guest, David Roytenberg, introduce himself.
All right. Thank you, Jarrod. My name is David Roytenberg. I live in Ottawa, and I'm active in my synagogue and in the Merikaz Canada political movement, which is affiliated with the conservative movement in Canada. I'm a retired computer scientist and still run a business from my home. And I'm somebody who's intensely interested in Israel. I've thought and written about Israel a lot over the past number of years.
Terrific. And we're going to explore some of that in greater detail because we're fascinated by your biography and how you got interested in all this stuff. I want to underscore the fact that David is from Canada. I am originally from Montreal, Canada. I don't know if I've mentioned that in previous broadcasts or not, but it was very important for us. We've checked off the Jew box, we've checked off the Zionist box, but it was very important that we had another Canadian. We got another Canadian onto the show because if I ever want to make it big in Canada, which is everyone's lifelong goal, we need to have a certain amount of Canadian content. It's like if you watch Degrassi, The Next Generation, you'll only hear Canadian music because I have to adhere to the Canadian content rule. So here I am doing my part, Canada.
I would like to also add that I have some Canadian roots as well. I spent a year and a half in Vancouver, British Columbia. So that was a very long time ago, though. But I am an honorary Canadian.
If you say so. We didn't vote on it, but we could do that later on in the podcast.
David, am I an honorary Canadian?
You have my vote, Adam.
He's just Ontario. I mean, you don't have the critical Quebecois vote. Not that I'm a Quebecois person myself. Oh, that's right. I'm not doing enough French content here, so we'll never be officially broadcast in Quebec. But well, what can you do? We can't do anything about it. Anyways, we wanted to have David on tonight, in part because we're not just elitist academics hiding out in our ivory tower. Public engagement is a very important part of our mission with the Jewish Studies Zionist Network. In fact, a lot of the support we get comes from the educated public. And David had the opportunity, we mentioned in the first episode, the film Israelism, which we unpacked the trailer and poster, the promotional material. We unpacked it at length in our first episode titled Liar, Liar, Hair on Fire, which I invite viewers to watch if you haven't seen it yet. But we realized that we do need to have an actual movie review to complement what we said in the first episode, even though I still firmly believe that, the promotional material stands on its own because 90% of the people who engage with this film will only see the promotional material. They won't actually
Let me also add, if anyone's concerned, that in that first episode, no one's hair actually caught fire.
Yeah. God knows we tried, but it just didn't,
right.
Didn't happen. Yeah. I put a lot of gel in my hair before we did what hair remains to try to do it. But you're the one who had the lighter. I didn't have any fire.
Right. Yeah.
So, but David was fortunate enough to see the movie at the location where it was being screened in Ottawa at Carleton University. And I would have attended myself had I been in Ottawa. So he could give us the full rundown. And we were very interested in, what the movie Israelism, just to repeat its name if you aren't familiar with it yet, actually had to say about Israel and, more importantly, the alleged indoctrination Americans are experiencing to really practice Israelism as opposed to what one would think that Judaism is or is supposed to be.
Basically, we want to know how bad this movie was.
Well, I have to say that when I saw the poster, I was worried. And when I saw the presenter, I was worried because I knew that she had, I guess, associated her name and her support with other things in the past, which had I guess, expressed views about Israel that I didn't agree with. And the other person who was there that night, I'm not sure if I can mention names or not.
Is this person on our side?
No.
Okay, well, yeah, don't mention it.
He was the executive producer.
Oh, we can mention his
post-production.
name. Yeah, absolutely. Gilly Getz, right?
Yeah, his
Yeah.
name was and he was there to handle the talkback, and actually the talkback with him was kind of interesting too. Anyway, I wanted to go and because I did get into arguments with people beforehand, people said, well, you know, this is crazy. People are condemning this movie without seeing it. So I thought, well, yeah, they have a point. I mean, as you say, the promotional material in and of itself is disturbing and harmful. I agree with you there, but maybe the movie itself isn't as bad as it looks like it might be.
And he did publish a review on the movie earlier this week, which I encourage. David has a terrific blog at Substack. We'll make sure you say the URL at the end so people could.
We'll put that in the comments. For
I don't. The audience doesn't see the comment, so it'll only benefit us.
Oh, okay.
As far as I know, I think that's how Zoom works. I mean, we are a low budget production. We don't have the way to have anything scroll across the screen.
Right.
As of now, I'm working on my video editing skills.
We don't have the budget that the filmmakers of the Israelism movie had.
Maybe Gilly Getz could edit this for us. Maybe he could actually get Foxman to interject and come on and defend himself. Well, I think we should try to get Foxman. Once we tell him that David's been on the show, I mean, hey, he'll gladly jump on.
Thank you, Jarrod.
Yeah, David, before you start talking about the movie, I just, out of curiosity, and we can get into this more afterwards, was Jewish Studies of Carleton represented there? Because I know there's some people in Jewish Studies of Carleton who are, not happy about the extent to which anti-Zionism has taken root in some corners of that university.
As far as I know, not. I mean, I didn't know all the people who attended. There were about 40 people who showed up altogether. I was pleased that the room was relatively empty, actually. But and I think one of the people who spoke afterwards was probably a professor of Carleton, but I don't know her name. She might have been Jewish Studies. But I had actually written to one of the people who works there at the Zelikovic Center, saying, maybe people should come, right? I'm a little worried about this movie and what its message is, so maybe you should come. And she had other fish to fry. She's dealing with another problem with I guess what she called effectively anti-Semitic behavior, although it was being done administratively, as she put it. Anyway, she didn't come.
The person who spoke, was that an invited person to speak, or they just put up their hand, you mean, and just
yeah, this is just one of the people who came to see the movie.
And she was critical of it?
She found something good to say about it.
Okay.
Without endorsing the message, she did find something about it that she liked and said that. So yeah.
Okay.
And there were some other people there that I recognized because I've attended some of the anti-Zionist group here in Ottawa. They bring in speakers, and I've attended one or two of them. And so I recognized a couple of people from those events, right? And those people were definitely there to support the movie. But maybe I should stop teasing the audience.
Sure, yeah. One question though: with the anti-Zionist events, do they serve good food and have an open bar? I mean,
I'm afraid not. I'm afraid
okay,
not.
well,
No such
there's
thought.
absolutely no reason to go whatsoever.
No, that's right.
I read a book about, I think it was by David Remnick, Lenin's Tomb, and he pointed out early on that the ultra right-wing nationalists who were rising in the early 90s, they serve absolutely the best food in the world. Like he had dinner at Vladimir Zhirinovsky's house, and apparently the meal was spectacular. So so the anti-Zionists don't have their act together as far as that goes, which is an advantage.
Not when I went to their last event. The last event I attended was about 4 years ago. It was before the pandemic.
Okay. Yeah. So
anyway.
Let me just, before I turn the mic over to you, let me just repeat the upshot of the presentation. One of the that we gave in our first episode, one of the things that Adam and I basically agreed on, we disagreed on a couple of other things, but was that on their own, the poster coupled with the trailer presented American Jewry as being disloyal to the United States, as being a prospective fifth column, because one of the important quotes from there was this woman saying 10% of my class, ended up serving in the IDF, or 10% of my school. And if you look at the promotional material, we analyzed it, and it clearly suggests that the Americans being depicted in there are more loyal to Israel than the United States. And that quote in the trailer seemed to really confirm that, along with the flag waving and along with the Trumpist moment, which I know
Right.
we're going to talk about. Because
And the flyer too definitely seemed to depict disloyalty on the part of American Jews.
Yeah,
So
and not taping with that quote.
Right. Jarrod and I assessed this film from the trailer and the flyer as not being about Israel, but being about American Jews. Right. Would you say that that was the case from seeing the movie?
Yes, that's right. I think that's correct. The movie is although what the movie does is take a certain narrative about Israel as a given, right?
Yeah.
And that was one of my complaints about it, is that the material that you saw at the beginning, the excerpts, which were largely from the first part of the movie, they were actually less disturbing in context. Like the quote about Israel is Judaism and Judaism is Israel was less bothersome when you saw the whole conversation. Similarly to some of the other quotes.
See, Jarrod, I was right about that.
Yeah.
But the movie wasn't so bad in the end. That's what you're right about.
No, that quote.
Yeah,
Judaism
when you saw it in context, it was not trying to say that schools are indoctrinating people to only worship Israel, which is also the message I took from the trailer. Right, yeah. With that one line taken out of context, I thought, oh my God, they're going to slander Jewish schools.
Yeah,
I even phoned the head of the Jewish school in Ottawa and said maybe somebody from the school should be there, because I think they're like defaming Jewish education, and they're spreading suspicion towards Jewish schools. But in context, it wasn't so bad, right?
Is Gilly Getz Canadian? Was this like a Canadian production?
No, Gilly Getz is Israeli.
Right, I assume so, but he made, so it's I mean, the footage they used of schools is the United States. They didn't really do anything.
Yeah, it was very American centric. My Canadian sensibilities were highly offended by the complete lack of actual Canadian content.
Which is one more reason why this podcast is far more important than any of this junk being produced by the anti-Zionists, because we actually do have Canadian content in our.
Also, I will say that is actually something else that bothered me about this particular film being screened in Canada. Because having lived there myself for a year and a half, I learned as an American living there that Canadians already harbor some some opinions that are quite negative about Americans in general.
Oh yeah, we hated you guys growing up.
Exactly, right? And so the notion that Americans, and let alone forget Jews, Americans in general, are brash and crude and very jingoistic, I think adds to the film as something that is kind of dangerous as a piece of propaganda, particularly when screened in Canada.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And there's a reason why, in my generation, at least in the early 90s, when backpacking in Europe, all Canadians have a Canadian flag on their backpack because they don't want to be identified as American. I've even heard that some Americans put Canadian flags on their backpack because they don't want to be identified as American, especially in Western Europe. Eastern Europe was okay because they loved Americans at that point. But let's let David speak. So, basically the open-ended question we want to ask you is, tell us your impressions about the film, the story it tried to tell. And then after that, we could weigh it against the promotional material and try to figure out why they would issue such promotional material if it's not an accurate reflection of the movie. But let's hear what you have to say about the movie.
Okay. So the first part of the movie consists largely of interviews with people who are pro-Israel. There's a guy from the Union of Reform Judaism, I could think they're Israel engagement vice president, and then there's a Jewish educator, and I think that's the woman who says Israel is Judaism and Judaism is Israel. And there's Abe Foxman, who and when you if you were to watch that first part of the movie on its own, it wasn't that bothersome, right? It depicted fairly accurately that young Jews are taught to have a connection to Israel, to be sympathetic to Israel, to be concerned about Israel, that standing on its own didn't seem so bad, right? I mean, the first part of the movie was not that hard to watch.
The woman, just to interrupt, the woman who said Israel is Judaism, she was a pro-Israel person?
Yes.
Because I couldn't tell from the trailer.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
But one of the critiques, which I think is fair, is that these people were used by the filmmaker to make one part of his case, but then entirely excluded from the conversation in the rest of the movie, where he was, basically telling the story about how awful Israel is and how the American Jewish institutions are therefore complicit in this awful thing that Israel is doing, right? So there really are. There was the first part of the movie which depicted how connected Jews are to Israel and how enthusiastic they are, in a way that I mean, obviously it focused on the pro-Israel stuff. Not every day in a Jewish school is like that. Not every moment in a synagogue is like that. But it's certainly true that we learn to love Israel in Jewish institutions, which of course I think is a great thing.
When you say Jews, I mean, which Jews were they depicting in the film? Because my impression was that it was Orthodox Jews. I mean, that's the way that the kids were dressed, waving flags.
And that in fact is, that one shot of the Jews marching in New York, they may have been Orthodox, but I think the people they were talking to were not Orthodox Jews. Like I'm not sure if Abe Foxman is Orthodox or not, but he's a community guy. And certainly the educator they were talking to, I think, was from a conservative school and not from an Orthodox school. And Zachary Braderman made the same mistake. Oh, I'm sorry if I mentioned a name that I shouldn't have.
As well as public, he has a blog, Jewish Philosophy Place. He's a
so he also thought that it was all about. He also thought it was all about Orthodox Jews, and I guess because he also saw the trailer.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's really barely about Orthodox Jews at all. It's about more about conservative and Reform Jews who represent I think a bigger chunk of the Jewish community.
Did they actually say that?
They're not exactly the most right-wing Jews, though, that we could think of. So usually they lean left politically.
The Reform do. Conservative or more. I mean, as Jacob Neusner said, they eat kosher but think treif, right? I mean, they go along with the Orthodox stuff, but in their minds, they'd rather be out eating bacon. But yeah, I think politically conservative still leans heavily Zionist.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that's right, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so much at home in the conservative stream of Judaism in particular. But there are, I mean, the Orthodox rabbi that they interviewed is also a pro-Israel guy, and there's certainly plenty of enthusiastic Zionists in the Reform movement too. Although,
absolutely,
other ideas are infiltrating certainly. But So
but
anyway, that's what they focused on.
Yeah. So there's a two-pronged question here, just to talk about the community here. One, in the movie, did they distinguish between different denominations? And the second question is, did they actually go into the school systems and look at the classes, film people singing Hatikva in the morning in the gym, like we did at my school when I was growing up, or they're just really doing this in a very superficial manner?
Yeah, there was. I don't recall scenes in school. There might have been, scenes of kids waving Israeli flags. I don't remember for sure.
There was one in the trailer. There was in the trailer where they're marching through the hallway of their school with Israeli flags.
But that's hardly an exploration of what's going on in the classroom.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that must have been in there, but no, there wasn't much in the way of classroom stuff. It was more people talking. There were lots of first person interviews with people talking about how important Israel is to Jews, and besides Abe Foxman, there was the woman that we also saw in the trailer. And so they're basically painting this picture, but no, to answer your question, no, they didn't drill down into what flavor of Jew they were talking to really. Mm-hmm. You saw in the captions that so and so was from the Union of Reform Judaism, and so was from the Schechter School, I think, right? So that's how you knew,
right?
Right. So, but they paint this picture of this very enthusiastically pro-Israel Jewish community, and how it communicates those those beliefs to young people. So that part I found was relatively accurate and honestly presented. But then they gradually transition. They start talking to Simon Zimmerman and to this guy named Eitan, who are the principal storytellers of the movie. So they, having set the stage by showing all these Jews who are very pro-Israel, then they start hearing from Simone, who, I guess, about her journey from being very pro-Israel to being very critical of the occupation. And basically,
just to clarify, Zimmerman, she's one of the founders of If Not Now, if I'm
that's
correct.
right, and then she's also in the trailer,
yeah,
I believe. But just
briefly, is that her in the
so,
poster? Is that Simone? That's Simone Zimmerman.
I think that is her. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
there
the quote from
there was never any showing of how Israel is ever discussed with any nuance among American Jews, right?
Correct. That is one of the things that I fault the movie for, because if the people that they'd interviewed to establish the strong fidelity of the Jewish community to Israel in the first part of the movie had been asked to comment on the film's own message, I'm sure they would have had all sorts of interesting things to say about it.
Yeah.
Right. And there was this criticism that I read online, but and I also heard during the talk back after the movie that we have this guy Abe Foxman complaining that he was duped, but he hasn't watched the movie, and we told him it was a movie about the engagement of the American Jewish community with Israel, and that's exactly what the movie is about, they said, right? But that's a bit disingenuous, right? Because they have a very specific story to tell about Israel, and they don't actually interview anybody who would question that story, right? These people that they talked to at the beginning is only to establish just how enthusiastically young Jews are being indoctrinated. That's really the message, and that was the purpose of having them in the movie, and they didn't ask them about anything else.
But see, the other problem here is just based on the way you've recounted is they don't actually seem to go into the classrooms and listen to Israeli content being propagated by teachers. So they're making these sweeping assumptions. Since we started up the Jewish Studies Zionist Network, we've been very active in criticizing and condemning what a lot of these anti-Zionists, including ones in Jewish studies, say in public. But are they doing this in their classroom or not? I get on my presentation that I gave for camera a few weeks ago, I said, I honestly don't know. Unless there's something actually in the classroom.
Not only that, but if you look at our list of signers, like we have a very diverse group of people politically. The one thing that everyone has in common is that they're Zionists and consider Zionism a legitimate expression of Jewish peoplehood. But on specific questions about Israel and two-state solution versus the status quo, or how to make a two-state solution work, all that, we run the gamut. So if we run the gamut, you would assume that, well, it's true that the Jewish community runs the gamut. When I was in school, as I was saying in our first video, we hardly ever had Israel discussed at school. I went to a traditional Orthodox school, but there was never very much discussion at all, certainly not on politics. So I would imagine that the schools, like I've never been in them, right? I just went to that school, but I would imagine that like Jarrod's school that he went to, most schools, when they do discuss Israel, they're not actually indoctrinating the kids into thinking one way. There's probably a more nuanced conversation taking place, thinking about, the Palestinian side of it to an extent, right? It's got to be more balanced than what the movie seems to portray.
I can't speak for today, but certainly when I went to Solomon Schechter growing up, the line was Jews want peace, Arabs don't. Every war was defensive, which of course is true to a large extent. But they didn't really mention the Palestinians at all, certainly not by name. There was all about the Arabs. And, in 1982, the Arabs don't want peace, that's more or less accurate. That's not a misrepresentation of what's going on in the Arab world in 82. Aside from Egypt, and Egypt took a lot of shit for signing that peace treaty. Sadat ended up getting assassinated. They were expelled from the Arab League. it was pretty clear that the consensus was that no, you can't deal with the Jewish state, and
Right.
certainly not in public in any sort of way. So I didn't get a nuanced education as far as Israel goes, but my education wasn't Israel, 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 and that's all that Judaism was. I mean, we studied Torah 3 times a week, as I said in the first thing. We prayed, and we didn't only recite prayers regarding Israel.
Yeah.
Yes, we sang Hatikva every morning in the gym. So I don't want to claim that we were indoctrinated, but we were certainly given a pro-Israel narrative that I imagine would happen if you were to send your kids to Irish day school to learn about, the great Irish nation that was oppressed for Britain, for so long. I don't think.
Well, all I know is that in the Jewish community, which I have been involved in, when we talk about Israel, it is a lot more nuanced than they're making it seem like it takes place. Maybe in schools, it's like how you're describing, but like at the Jewish Federation, there's a very nuanced conversation.
Oh, for
Even
sure.
at synagogue around the Kiddush table, right? There's different points of view on the matter being discussed. So I don't think that it's as nearly as one-sided as this movie seems to claim.
No, I'm talking about elementary school and high
Yeah.
school education at these
Right.
private Jewish schools that are of the conservative. I think it's largely the conservative Zionist bent. I mean, my school was a Solomon Schechter school, which is conservative by definition.
Mhm.
But so
I
again,
said
the
my-
whole reducing it to just Israel, I think, is absurd.
Yeah,
they didn't go into the classrooms.
Yeah, David.
Yeah, to be fair, I think that message is it seemed more from the trailer than from the movie itself that they weren't saying in the movie that all they learn about in Jewish school is Israel. That's the impression I came away from the trailer, but not so much from the movie, right? The focus of the movie is on showing that Jewish schools promote a connection to Israel, but they weren't saying that that's all that people learned. And they never really do explain the term Israelism. So I assumed that they were going to be talking about this cult, right, that has now replaced Judaism, but they didn't say it in those words, right?
How is the phrase from the Palestinian that we saw in the trailer that the Jews tell me that they like me, but they don't like Palestinians? How is that used in the film?
Okay, so that guy was basically there to corroborate Simone Zimmerman's claim that the Jewish education that she received simply ignored the Palestinians, so pretended that the Palestinians didn't exist, right? And that may or may not be true, but her claim that she went through Jewish schools and came out of Jewish education and went to university, right, and was completely kept in the dark. I do find that a little disingenuous, and I do think that it kind of like knowing where she stands now, right, it's like she's kind of going back retroactively and painting a very cartoonish picture of the world that she came out of.
She cannot be trusted. She's an activist. She's an activist with If Not Now, and their project is to liquidate Israel. And you follow them on Twitter, you'll see that it's all propaganda. Right. And moreover, if she genuinely didn't realize by the time she was like in 6th grade that there's a little bit of propaganda going on her, well, I will have to question her intelligence. I mean, I'll just say that outright. I mean, how do you not see through, some of this stuff? So, so Simone Zimmerman, I mean, she's an activist and a particular type of activist, heading a particular type of organization with an agenda. I mean, this is not about nuance. They don't support the idea of nuance. And
I would say that the movie shares her agenda, right? The movie is telling her story from her point of view in order to deliver her message. She isn't the only protagonist. The other main character is this guy who's known only as Eitan, and he's an American who joined the IDF, and he recounts that he saw his unit doing bad things, and that he brought a prisoner to detention, and then he saw that prisoner beaten up, but he was with his commander, and his commander didn't say anything, so he didn't know what to do. So I suspect that Eitan is connected with Breaking the Silence, which they also talk about in the movie. But basically the message here with both Eitan and Simone is the same thing, that there's this conspiracy or whatever, this very entrenched Jewish establishment, which is indoctrinating Jewish youth with a particular story about Israel, which, as they say as they have her say in the trailer, she came to realize is a lie. Right, so that this is where we transition to the movie's message, the movie's voice, as opposed to the voice of the pro-Israel people that they talk to, and we hear more and more about what Israel is doing wrong, and then that's when the Palestinian guy comes in and he says, when I came to America, well, you have the quote in the trailer. I was surprised that they said we like you, but we don't like Palestinians. Right, but that really it kind of corroborates her claim that Jews don't learn anything about Palestinians. That's the point.
Wait a sec, but before she claimed that she was taught that Palestinians didn't exist. So how could she be taught that Palestinians don't exist and also be taught to not like Palestinians? Or that other quote that Palestinians need to be kept in danger if they don't exist?
I understand how that could be sorted out, right? There's a people that are Arabs. Right, we're not going to call them Palestinians. So that's who she's talking about.
Okay,
that's right. And that quote that they used of hers, when taken in context, I mean, it's still outrageous, right? I still hate it. It's like the worst thing in the movie. But it's clear when you see it in the context of the movie that she isn't saying that people are being literally told that Palestinians have to be unsafe. That's her interpretation of the meaning of the education that she got, right? A very, in my view, defamatory and skewed description of that education. But basically, that her analysis of the Zionist position is, the argument which I've often made that Israel does things to protect Jews, Israel does things for its own security, which are then characterized as apartheid or human rights violations, right? And they ignore the whole security dimension, right? So basically, she's putting all of those arguments into a bag and saying that what they're really saying is that Palestinians have to be unsafe, right? Which is an incredibly tendentious way to characterize the Zionist argument, and that's what's actually going on there. And that indeed is the film's point of view.
So the second part of the film, where it takes this dark turn, this is where they start showing her perspective and the propaganda that she learned, and then they actually go to Israel and show the occupation. Is that a big portion of the film?
There were some scenes from Bethlehem, right? And they're wandering around in Bethlehem, and somebody makes the point. Actually, Fred makes this point in his review that although they're trying to depict the horrors of Palestinian life under Israeli rule, the scenes in Bethlehem are pretty everyday. They go to a restaurant, and it doesn't look like life is so awful, right? So there's a bit of cognitive dissonance there.
Yeah. I would assume they would have gone to Jenin or one of those places if they wanted to show or Hebron.
There's the part in the trailer where Peter Beinart says that you go to Israel and you see non-democracy up close, right?
Right.
I mean, does the film suggest that that's what happens? And if that's in fact the case, how do we explain all of these young Jews that go to Israel on birthright trips or in other ways and don't come back in that small percentage of these rising activists that are now suddenly realizing the truth about Israel?
Well, yeah, Beinart's comment refers specifically to those who go to the Palestinian territories,
I see.
Who go beyond the Green Line and into the PA, and it also kind of that's when it sort of turns to the third part of the movie, which I found the most disturbing. And to be fair, the Jewish studies professor who introduced it also criticized the filmmaker on that point, which is that they then show this montage of scenes of Nazis marching and Trump speaking and the voiceover, the story that the filmmaker is telling over those shots, which are very disturbing, is that instead of fighting against the real anti-Semitism, which is rising up all around us, and they're depicting these anti-Semitic people in action and very vivid and horrible scenes, instead of fighting anti-Semitism like they should be, they're instead doing whatever they can to silence these brave young people who dare to say the truth about what Israel's doing to the Palestinians.
And I'm sure that
and they're also linking Israelism up with white supremacy, right? I mean, that's
well, that's the subtext. That was the thing I said at the talkback, is that I said, I know this isn't true, and you know this isn't true, but if I was someone who didn't know much about Israel, Palestine, or the Jewish community, I would walk out of this movie thinking that the Jews are allied with Nazis.
And Beinart probably doesn't mention that if you're going to the territories, they are supposed to have elections there. So where is that non-democracy coming from?
Right. Yeah, it's true. There's no context at all. The non-democracy he's talking about is the occupation, right? Which is this kind of not defined but horrible thing that Israel is.
And no discussion of Oslo and how the area was divided. They made an agreement about how to divide the West Bank. None of that.
Not a peep. Not a peep.
All right.
Well, the anti-Zionists are very ahistorical, and they decontextualize everything, and they refuse to get into the weeds of history. And that's why they could reach the position that 1948 is a racist endeavor, which means that everything that follows from 1948 is some sort of war crime, right? And they have to bend the facts to fit it. And, I mean, when people start saying, yeah, the Arab citizens of Israel are oppressed, I mean, that's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. Obviously, there's day-to-day racism, and if I were to make a parallel, maybe they're like the Latino citizens of the United States, especially, in these times where they have to, look over their shoulder every so often and just be, careful. But they're equal before the law in every respect. They have the right to vote. They have the right to be employed. Is there discrimination in the workplace? Probably. I mean, but that's true of virtually every place in the world. I could go on about Quebec for an hour about how discrimination against the Anglophones is pretty severe. It's a form of ethnic cleansing what they're doing in Quebec. It's actually worse to be an Anglophone in Quebec than it is to be an Arab citizen of Israel, as far as I'm concerned at this point. Yes, I've got my anti-Quebec bias coming through here.
I want to ask how Cornel West figures into the movie, because he is in the trailer.
It's just the clip you saw in the trailer is also the clip you see in the movie. They only use him very briefly.
Why do they use him at all? Like, what's the point of adding Cornel West in there? He's not even Jewish. He's not even a witness to this supposed indoctrination.
Yeah, I guess he is considered to be a spokesperson for the message that the film wants to deliver, which is that there's this need to pursue justice, and that young Jews, and in fact that's what Cornel West is mostly saying, is these young Jews don't want to be the oppressors, right? Like they were oppressed. I mean, that's what they have him say there.
And David, just to backtrack,
and they also throw in Chomsky, right? And
Chomsky was in there too at the end. Yeah.
And again,
Chomsky opposes doesn't Chomsky oppose BDS? Or am I thinking?
You're thinking of Norman Finkelstein.
I'm thinking of Finkelstein, right.
Finkelstein, who defected.
To backtrack on one thing you said, though, the professor who was screening the movie, you said, criticized that portion where they started to link it with Trumpism and whatnot. Did Gilly Getz respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, she criticized him in a gingerly way, saying, it's important to realize that most Jews actually didn't vote for Trump, right? And he acknowledged that. Says, well, that's not what we're trying to say. But when I raised the same issue in the talkback afterwards, I said it much more aggressively, I guess, and I said, you're creating this false impression that the organized Jewish community is connected with fascism and Nazism. And Gilly Getz's response to that was really interesting. He said, Bibi met with Elon Musk today. So I have to say, I was supposed to be asking a question, but I didn't. But I actually cut him off, and they let me talk. I said, we know that some Jews are talking to some right-wingers. That's not my question. My question is it okay to convey the message that the Jewish community is aligned with fascism and Nazism? And at that point, the moderator, whose name I'm avoiding mentioning, jumped in and said, well, of course it's not good to suggest that, because it's not true, right? And then she moved on to the next questioner.
Okay, so they're evading at best.
So basically, it's
Yeah, yeah. To stick with the moderator, I'll bring up something else with the moderator, and who generally evades answering such questions. I asked her point blank once. I brought up the speech from Cooney, the law school graduate who gave that outrageously anti-Semitic speech, and I quoted her directly. She said that the global threat of racism, capitalism, imperialism, and Zionism needs to be fought. And I said, do you believe that Zionism is a global threat? Point blank. There's 14 million Palestinians in the world, and most of them live in the area immediately around Israel. So how exactly is Zionism a global threat? Without it being, an anti-Semitic trope here. And she relented and basically said, no, that's not right. And so my response was, well, why didn't you and that large chunk of Jewish studies you represent actually speak up about this? I mean, this is anti-Semitism taking place in academia. I mean, even according to the Jerusalem Declaration of Anti-Semitism, even their Jerusalem definition of anti-Semitism,
which that doesn't exist.
That is anti-Semitism. Sorry?
The JDA doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't?
No, didn't they remove their website?
No, it was just down for a couple of hours.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
I would have tried to hack in myself and pull them down. I wouldn't have had a problem doing that if I had some spare time. But I don't have the skills. Maybe David, with your technological skills, could take down the JDA. But no, to get back to the JDA just for a second here, I think that one, there's enough escape clauses in that document for them to argue their way out of it. And secondly, I think that document was purely performative, and it was a way for them to say, no, we are concerned about anti-Semitism. Here's our declaration. They haven't once stepped up in the name of the JDA to investigate an incident, especially if it comes from the left, that is clearly anti-Semitic, as in calling Zionism a global threat.
Merely a defensive posture against the IHRA.
Yeah, but it's also for show. I mean, if they were serious about it, if they want to say that, okay, here's a definition where we're not going to say that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, except when it's using traditional anti-Semitic tropes, then why aren't you actually saying anything? And the answer is they have no interest. They will not go after any anti-Semites on the left, period. Except in really the most extreme places, like what's his name in Britain, right?
Apparently, when Abbas came out with the anti-Semitic statement a couple of weeks ago, there was a group of 100 Palestinians or so who signed a statement criticizing him, and the moderator shared it and said, thank you for this. But then, of course, the whole organized Palestinian establishment rallied around Abbas, right, and criticized the 100 Palestinians who dared to criticize him for his anti-Semitic remarks. So to me, this actually was eye-opening. It was a public demonstration of just how pervasive anti-Semitism is as part of the Palestinian national movement.
And what about the Palestinian who visited Auschwitz, the teacher who got in trouble for going on that trip?
Right. That's it. I think those who don't know better might think that anti-Semitism might be an obstacle to peace between Israel and the Palestinians.
That horrible person, the journalist Mohammed El-Kurd, I didn't read the whole piece, but he had something in Mondoweiss either yesterday or the day before, where he basically said Jewish victimhood is not our problem, right? And I guess to a certain extent that might be true. I mean, the Holocaust, aside from the Grand Mufti, the Holocaust really does have nothing to do with the Palestinians. But I mean, he literally referred to, what we call anti-Semitism as just a trope while they're genuinely really suffering, which is absurd. The Holocaust isn't a trope. It's happened in recent memory. The Arab world expelling 750,000 Jews violently in the last 50 to 70 years is not a trope. It's something that your Arab brethren are directly responsible for. So,
to say nothing of blowing up and shooting and attacking Jews week in and week out in the present day, right? In the name of Palestine.
Yeah, the PFLP is a trope. Hamas is a trope. That's all they are. Okay.
Yeah.
So
no, it's real Jews who are being killed out there in the name of Palestinian liberation, right? It's easy. Some people seem to forget that, but I haven't.
Yeah.
So to wrap up, does this film have any redeeming value?
We also want to go back to the trailer too, but yeah, that's a good question. Is there any redeeming value to this film?
That's a good question. I mean, I really hated it, but well, I'll say what this professor said, who's the one who looked for something good to say about it. And she said that she thought it did a good job of telling the individual stories of the two protagonists of Simone and Eitan. Actually, I don't agree with that. I don't find Simone's story credible.
Why
as
should we
told
care
in-
about Simone's individual story? I mean, what's so special about her? I mean,
Yeah, well, I mean, the film wants us to think that there's this upwelling from within the Jewish community of a few brave people who are willing to stand against the establishment and fight for justice. I mean, that's their story, and you know, obviously, I don't agree with that story. I think that's a false story. But I guess it does. Here's something good about it. It's really quite a pure example of the alternative narrative that the that the left wing or the un-Jews or whatever you want to call them, the future that they want for American Jews. The message there is very clear that that Israel is engaged in something deplorable.
So it's good as propaganda goes. It's good for propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I wrote recently in one of my articles that to try and get inside the head of some of these people, you have to understand that for them, the question of Zionism and its merits is a closed question, right? They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to hear our arguments for why Israel is salvageable and why the two-state solution is still possible, or the nuances of history. They don't want to talk about that. For them, the subject is closed. The only thing they want to talk about is, are Jews in America going to stand up for justice or not? Right?
well, they've all been
really
brainwashed, so obviously they're not. So, I mean,
they want to change the subject, right? And it makes very clear what it is we're up against. I guess that's what's good about it.
So Adam and I think it's fair to say that Adam and I I think we did a good job analyzing the trailer and the poster, and I'm prepared to say that the two in conjunction with each other definitely is anti-Semitic, without saying anti-Zionism is necessarily anti-Semitic. I felt there were enough tropes in there, especially the disloyalty, dual loyalty trope, to make that claim about the material that advertises the film. And again, 90% of the people who engage with the film are not going to see the film. As you said, only 40 people showed up at the screening. But I guarantee you, with that discussion that took place on her wall, there were hundreds of people watching the trailer at that point. Absolutely. But they didn't, go and see the movie or anything, and probably won't. Right. So without really having to define anti-Semitism, at this point, because it's a difficult topic in and of itself, would you say that the film is anti-Semitic? I mean, I know you agree that the trailer and the poster are, right? You do agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that someone watching the movie who had a relatively low level of knowledge of the subject would come away feeling angry and resentful towards American Jews. And that's basically what I was saying to Gilly at the end. What you've done here is bad for the Jews, right? And yeah, if that's your definition of anti-Semitism, and to me that's reasonable. It's an anti-Semitic film. It is something that would tend to bring the Jewish community into disrepute and increase people's feelings of resentment toward Jews. It
endangers us. Right.
Yeah.
It puts us in danger, especially if it lumps us in with white supremacists, and it makes people think, oh, the Jews are a problem here. If we're going to fight Trumpism, we need to fight the Jews as well. Which then brings me to my, final question here. What is their ultimate agenda? I mean, obviously their agenda is to end the occupation, but is their agenda beyond that? Or are they just using American Jews as a tool in order to do this by endangering American Jewry, by suggesting their complicity in all sorts of terrible things?
Or do they want the Jews out of there entirely? Or do they want do they want the Jews out of there entirely? Do they want a two-state solution? Do they want a binational approach? What is it that is their answer? What do they want?
Well, I can't read their minds. I mean, certainly, if you look at its effect, my opinion is of this kind of material is that it's bad for North American Jews, and their message about Israel is contributes to the sense that Israel is a pariah, which I think is bad for Israel. Ultimately, Israel has to survive by force of arms, but undermining international support and defaming Israel is definitely not without consequences, right? The global reputation of Israel, over a period of time, that could impact the foreign policy of the United States, for example, which I suspect is one of the things that it's explicitly one of the things these people want to do, I think.
Yeah, they're also trying to leverage, their power against American Jewry, who are ultimately, defenseless when push comes to shove, by endangering them. So, my question is, are they willfully doing this because they know it'll lead Jews to keep their mouth shut, as they're doing on college campuses? Is their goal to subject Jews to litmus tests so they actually end up renouncing Zionism to, end American support for Israel among the Jewish community, because they somehow think this will help bring about the liquidation of Israel?
See, what I'm asking is that the film seems to be based from the trailer and your account of seeing it, about these two Jews who are very angry, and they're rising up, right, and joining others that are rising up to fight for justice. My question is, what exactly is that justice? And if that is not defined in the film, then what we're left with is what Jarrod is saying, right? That ultimately all the film does is create an audience that is now going to potentially do harmful things to Jews, whether it's violent, probably not in most cases, but things like subject Jews to litmus tests and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, I think that's the actual effect. I can't claim to know what the motives are of the filmmaker.
Well, the fact that you can't answer that from seeing the film is a flaw in the film.
Okay.
Well, they claim their motives is to,
and
create justice for all in the Middle East, right? They don't think their motives have anything to do with American Jewry, right? And I think maybe, intimidating American Jewry and subjecting them to litmus tests is just a tactic. But I also think, and I think we should talk about this in a future episode, I won't call this self-hatred exactly, but there is this genuine revulsion for the idea of Jews exercising power. And there's historical reasons for that. And in the present, they want to be in the good graces with the social justice movement. David Hirsch has persuasively argued this, that being anti-Zionist is the ticket of admission into left-wing circles. And if you're in academia, you have to be on the left. You can't be, not on the left in academia when push comes to shove. And the Jews are under suspicion because they're Zionists. So we have to demonstrate our anti-Zionist credentials, which is why, again, said professor will never speak out against someone who articulates global Zionism as a threat. Yeah, and especially if that person saying it is a Palestinian, they will never open their mouths, because then they will be suspect by the genuinely anti-Semitic, non-Jewish social justice left. And they're outrageously anti-Semitic at this point. So I think there's an agenda here to reconstruct American Jewry in an image that's palatable for these people on the social justice left, which is not unique in history. Christians had a certain expectations of Jews throughout the centuries, and there were certain Jews who tried to refashion the Jews to appease the Christians. Of course, we know that never works out in the long run.
Well, if that's the goal, why are they showing this to Gentile audiences?
Why are they, or why aren't they?
Why are they? Like, if they're trying to refashion the Jew, right? It seems
very good question.
Yeah,
that's a very good question. That's something to think about, and we'll address it in a future episode. We're nearing the hour mark. This time I definitely noted the start time. I think we've gone 55 minutes, which is always a good time to finish up. David, do you have any last things you want to throw out there?
Well, I was just thinking in response to what you and Adam were just saying, and wondering about the motives. There was this statement that came out a few weeks ago in response to the Israeli protest movement, right? And that statement contained a call to action, right? There were 4 items in their call to action, and one of them was, a rethinking of how Jews are educated about Israel.
Yeah,
Basically,
that's the elephant in the room statement we're talking about.
yes, exactly.
Yes,
So
they made that
of,
abundantly clear. Yeah, yeah.
right. So if we're wondering what's on their mind, that may provide a clue, right? And to me, that this was indeed a call on American Jews to kind of refashion their relationship to Israel, rethink their relationship to Israel in light of the occupation. The statement, of course, didn't really talk about very much about the issues that Israelis are protesting about. They kind of pivoted and said that the real reason for the proposed changes had to do with perpetuating the occupation, right? As though there were no other things that mattered, or no other Israeli issues that were fueling all of that, which I thought was inaccurate. But it was really just an excuse to reiterate their own agenda, which is the occupation is bad, right? It doesn't matter how we ended it, but we have to end it, right?
But they don't even define the occupation, whether it includes the Israel proper or not.
Right, that's right. There's so much ambiguity in the message that it ends up just being a campaign to bring Israel into to disrepute. That's
disrepute and Americanize. Absolutely. Yeah. Because if that were, they said, look at all the Israelis who signed that. I said, well, then it should be written in Hebrew, directed at an Israeli audience, because they're the ones who have the power to actually change the internal dynamics of your state. But no, this is being directed at an American audience, and you're using the terms American Jewish billionaires and Jewish supremacy, which are all triggers. And it'll get non-Jews thinking, that there is, it's basically the protocols of the elders design at this point, right? Yeah. Some sort of cabal of people.
Israelis don't understand, I think, the impact that the statement would have on American Jews, because they just don't, their world is quite different from ours. So I've seen people who were more lenient to the Israelis who signed it than to the Americans who signed it, because maybe they don't realize the import of everything that they're signing up to.
Yeah.
I think in general, a lot of people signed it just because they wanted to be on board in favor of the protest movement. But did they read it? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, hopefully on a future episode, we'll have David Bernstein, one of the 3 David Bernsteins on to discuss his book, Woke Anti-Semitism, where he really shows why Jewishness is a problem.
We get all 3 of the David Bernsteins on.
It'll be complete chaos, but sure. Yeah. But in his book, he's basically arguing that it's not really just about Israel. There's there's this idea of Jewish supremacy, which is prevalent in social justice circles. We're some sort of privileged group that exercise power irresponsibly. It's actually happening with Indian Americans now too. A colleague of mine said a very disturbing article about how Indians in some ways are becoming the new Jews. And there's this idea that there is this Indian nationalist supremacy, and their diaspora is heavily engaged with it. And therefore, the social justice left needs to be on the lookout for this. They've introduced caste discrimination as one of the possibilities.
That was in the Claremont Institute's American Mind blog.
Yeah, okay, got it. Anyways, we're digressing, and we're hitting the 1 hour mark. So just to sign off, thank you, David Roytenberg, so much for your very enjoyable conversation. When we do post it, which will be probably after Sukkot, I will, after the first 2 days of Sukkot, you could throw a link to your Substack blog right in the comments, so people can check out your review.
Well, thank you, Jarrod, and thank you, Adam, for inviting me. It's really been very enjoyable talking to you guys as well, and I do appreciate the chance to do it.
Thanks for coming.
That's 3 Jews, 3 Zionists, and 2 Canadians, and perhaps an honorary Canadian. Signing off for episode number 3, which we have yet to title.